Welcome to the Right Handyman How-To series. In these videos, I will show you some tips and tricks to help you avoid those mistakes that can turn a small project into a large disaster. I'll be your host, Colin, the Right Handyman. Alright, so today we're going to be installing an Ikea countertop. It is a nice big long solid piece of laminated oak, and we're going to have to cut this to kind of fit into these angles. And of course run across here where the kitchen sink's going and that. Now the fun part's going to be is this is a relatively old house, and even in new houses walls are never straight, things are never square, so we got to kind of cut this to fit and make sure there's no unsightly gaps. We will have to leave a gap up against the wall here because being solid wood, it's going to expand and contract with humidity and seasons, and we got to give it a little bit of room to move around, or else it's going to kind of push against the wall, push against the cabinets, etc. So we're going to run through some tips and tricks on how to cut this nicely and how to join it together and make it all look good. Stay tuned. Alright, so I'm just about to start cutting this butcher block, but what I want to do is I want to put a nice fine finishing blade into my saw here. So I've got a nice new one with 40 teeth meant for fine finishing in plywood, and I'm going to take out this one that's already in there. It's a construction blade with only 24 teeth. It'll give you a rougher cut, and not only that, I've been using it for quite a while, so it's actually kind of dull, so it would probably just make a mess out of the cut I want to make here. Alright, so I'm set up to make this first cut here. So with this new blade in here, you can see I've set it just to kind of come through the butcher block here. I don't want to cut into my work table or anything like that. I've set up a nice straight edge on here because I got to have a nice clean cut, because these cuts will be butting up against each other. Anything that's crooked will obviously show through. Now the other main thing I've done is I have the good side facing down. The side you're seeing here is actually going to be the bottom. And the reason for that is if you look in the saw here, you'll see these teeth cut up. And what happens is when I cut this, I'm going to get a lot of what's called blowout. It's not going to be real clean on this side, but this side will be hidden. I should get a nice clean cut on the what will be the top side, and I can hide the so-called damage underneath. The other reason being is the base of my saw is aluminum. It's also a construction saw and has some debris on it, and if I'm going to leave any aluminum marks or anything like that, best to leave them on the bottom. Try and keep the top as clean as possible so I don't have to clean it up later. Now one other thing you may have noticed is I've lifted this butcher block up just with some pieces of plywood here. And the main reason for doing that is when I'm cutting it, I don't want this edge to drop, which will bind my blade, give me a nasty cut, possibly come flying back in my face, very, very bad. This butcher block is very heavy, and you want to support it both at both ends, as well as on either side of your cut, just for some either A, majority safety reasons, and B, helps you get a nice clean cut. So we finished our first cut here, and you can see this is the top. Very nice and clean, looks really good. And then of course when we look underneath where we should have all the tear out, there's a little bit. You can see a little bit over here, but actually that new blade cut quite nicely. There's very little tear out, but what is there will be hidden. The benefits of having a fresh sharp blade in there, but not only that, you want one that's meant for finish cutting, which will give you these clean cuts. Looking good. Let's test fit it and see how it works. Alright, so we got our first piece sitting here. It's going to go right by the oven. It's looking good. Fits in nicely. The one thing I did know is that the walls aren't going to be square, but there is a bit of a gap back here which we'll fill with some silicone and whatnot when we're done, just so water and food and whatever doesn't get in there. And it also allows room for this butcher block to expand and contract. Looking good. Alright, so I've cut both of these pieces and they fit pretty well. Looks pretty good. Got a little bit of a gap there, which is what we want. A little bit of a gap back here. Now, this joint, I got to make sure that it stays flush. So what I'll probably do is I'll route a groove in both of these and put a piece of 1/8 inch, glue a piece of 1/8 inch plywood in there and make sure that stays stable and doesn't flex and warp, because this wood is going to shift with seasons and temperature. The only other thing I think I got to do here is I'm just going to sand up a little bit of a bevel on the cut edges there just to match what came out of the factory, and we're good to go. All I got to do now is the other side. Okay, so now that I've cut all the pieces, what I'm going to do is I'm going to route a groove in all the butt joints and put a piece of 1/8 inch plywood in there just to kind of hold it all together so that if they do move, hopefully the surfaces will remain flat. There, so we got a nice groove in there now. Just got to do all the other pieces, put some plywood in there, and glue it all together. Okay, so this is just the one edge here. Basically, I've got this piece of 1/4 inch plywood. It wasn't an 1/8 like I said before, it's 1/4 inch. And I'm going to fill this full of glue. And then on the edge of this one here, I'm going to fill that groove full of glue. I'm going to put them together and then attach them to the cabinets. And then it should hopefully stay nice and level. Alright, so I've kind of rough cut all the big pieces here. They're just sitting in there right now, they're not attached, but I've also cut out for this, I guess they call these a farm sink or something like that, and it looks like she fits just lovely. So now the fun begins. I need to install them and ensure that these joints here remain flat, and I'll show you what I've done with those in just a little bit. Alright, first one is successfully installed. It's got all the brackets and screws and whatnot in the bottom. You'll notice on the brackets, of course you can't see them not very well, but where the screws go, they have these slots. And what that's going to do is allow for movement in the wood through the seasons. The screws will move along those slots and won't pull out of the wood. Got the first one in, still got to put the sink in and I got to do all the caulking, but partial success. Alright, countertops are in, the sink is in. It's usually just held in there with silicone. So I've put that in and I'm going to let that sit overnight, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do all the caulking, get all the seams, get it all sealed up, make sure no water gets in behind it, food, whatever else you got going. And then these do require an oiling, a specific type of oil to help it repel water and whatnot. But so far, so good.